All right, I guess we'll start. Thanks everyone for coming, friends, family, new acquaintances. So the title of this class is How to Speak Ancient Hebrew, Modern Israel. Some of us were here last week, but for those that weren't, the goal is to learn Hebrew, specifically words that were reinvented or made up in the modern era for things that didn't exist back when Hebrew was last used as a spoken language in the times of the Tanakh, the Mishnah, and the Gemara. So those are the main sources that we're going to look at, right? The Tanakh, Mishnah, and Gemara. We'll see how in the modern era people found words, ancient words, that they were able to repurpose and reinvent for modern usage. Today's topic will be medical terminology. Therefore, the lecture is called Doctor, Give Me the News, because I don't know if I have such a good sense of humor, but that's what we're going to talk about. And at the end, I'll try to say a few more words about the process of the revival of the Hebrew language. Last week, we had an interesting discussion about how it happened. Did it happen all at once? When did it really start in terms of the timeline of the different aliyot and establishment of the State of Israel? So maybe at the end we'll have some time to say a few words about that, just because I read more about it, and I'll share my thoughts on that. So without any further ado, I want to start with perhaps beginning of life, because we're talking about medicine, doctors, hospitals. Where does it all start? When you have a baby or when you get pregnant. So today in Israel, fertility is known as piryon, and infertility is piryon. Is, the opposite of something. And we have that in Tanakh and in Parashat Bereshit. So from that word pru urvu, piryon is fertility. And okay, I'm going to jump the next word. The third thing on my list is pundikaut. I learned this recently, and it blew me away that this is a word. We're talking about fertility and infertility. There's something called surrogacy, right? If for some reason a woman can't have a pregnancy, then you can have a surrogate. From what I understand, the surrogate mother doesn't contribute DNA to the baby, right? It's DNA from a different mother and father. They want to have a baby, and then the fetus is implanted in the surrogate mother. So the surrogacy is called pundikaut, and it comes from the word pundiki, which I think is really an Aramaic word, because we have it in the Gemara here. And what's this source? There's a pasuk, Vayita eshel be'er sheva. This is about Abraham, right? He plants a tree in Be'er Sheva. Why does the Torah tell us he plants a tree? So of course, they want to explain it. No, this is something special, something significant going on. So one rabbi says, Amar Shlakish, Melamed she'asa pardes, v'nataba kol minei megadim. Abraham Avinu in Be'er Sheva, and it says Vayita eshel, it means he planted an orchard and all sorts of fruit trees. Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Nehemiah had amar pardes v'had amar pundak. So then you have other rabbis. One rabbi says yes, it was an orchard. Another says no, it's an inn. Pundak is an inn. Okay, bishlam alaman amar pardes hayin dafti vayita. So if it was an orchard, then it makes sense. What does the pasuk say? Planted an eshel. Orchard is something you plant. But if it's an inn, how do you plant an inn? An inn is a building where you house guests, like a hotel or a motel. How do you say you planted? There is a place where you see that if you're pitching a tent, it's called planting also. So the inn was like a tent. So what does this have to do with what we're talking about? A surrogate mother. So the surrogate mother is like an innkeeper, a pundikait. Right? She's not the mother. She's just, letting the baby stay in her womb for 9 months. It's an innkeeper. And then the baby goes out. So that's pundikaut. I actually heard it recently on Shtisel. They're using the word that was like one of the issues on the show. And then I heard it, I'm like, oh, pundiki is an inn. This isn't the only source. It appears elsewhere in
So you put that together, you heard the word, and then you found the source, and you...
Yeah, exactly. So I'm familiar with Pundaki from other sources, but then I went to look it up, and I thought this was a really interesting one, because it also has the story about Abraham Avinu. And then, so the embryo was implanted in the surrogate mother. And this word hashtala, it's true of any type of medical implant. That's the word for implant, hashtala. And an example of pasuk that has this word, this is like talking about someone who's very fortunate in Sefer Tehillim. Your wife is like a fruitful vine, and therefore you see the word poria again, right? Fertile vine from Peru and Pirayon. And your sons are like olive saplings, like young olive trees. So shtalim are things that you planted, trees. Normally plant is lintoa, but here you have like a more poetic way of saying it. Lishtol is to plant. And therefore shetalim or hashtalot are implants. Cool, no? That's not what it was. I include some more words here without sources, just so you see. Sometimes you take something and you just, like a word that everyone knows, but you change it a little bit to have a new meaning. So therefore, like an egg that produces a baby or ovum is a beitzit instead of a beitzah, and then you can make a whole verb out of it. Biyutz is ovulation. I included hatzotzrot. I thought that the first time I thought this, I just started laughing. It was like a shiur about nidan, and like the rabbi was saying hatzotzrot. I'm like, what's that? And then I realized from the context, it's fallopian tubes. Because if anyone ever seen
what's the connection?
A diagram?
Are they trumpets? What is that?
Exactly. Hatzotzrot are trumpets. We have it in the Torah. With Ka'atem b'hatzotzrot, we say on Rosh Hashanah. So fallopian tubes are shaped like trumpets.
Shaped.
If you've ever seen a diagram, it's the tube that brings the egg from the ovaries to the uterus.
Shape.
So the shape. So hatzotzrot. Just like last week we had the shape of the pitom in the etrog was shaped like a piston. So that became the word for piston in an engine. So here we have something else.
How do you say trumpet in Hebrew today, modern Hebrew?
The same word.
Oh, so it just...
So if someone's saying hatzotzrot, it either means trumpets, either means I play the trumpet, or you figure it out from context. Exactly.
I think they still using that.
Since we're talking about the female reproductive system, and this is the last word for that, balut is actually the modern Hebrew word for menopause, and it comes from this pasuk that many of us are familiar with. After Abraham is told by the guests that come to visit him, he doesn't know they're angels, that he's going to have a son. Sarah hears it, and what does she do when she hears it? She laughs and said, how could I'm too old to have a baby. But what does she say literally? Ahare beloti means after I've been all worn out. Balu literally means like worn out, meaning she's old. Haytali idna. What? So after I'm old, worn out, I could have idna means like youth, and also like fertileness as well. Like Gan Eden is like the fertile garden. So how could I be youthful after I'm old? But for modern purposes, there's no word for menopause in the Tanakh. They said, we'll use this word. What is she saying basically? On a very basic level, the sign that the way she could say I can't have kids anymore is I'm not, no longer.
Is there a chance that is actually what it meant?
Exactly. So once you in a modern Hebrew, you use the word that way. You look back and you're like, that's what she meant.
She might, to think that
maybe that is the word.
Did that because she might have been menopausal at that point.
Right, exactly. She was 90 years old. Right. But yeah, it's not a question of age. It's it's
right.
Yes or no. Are you in that period of your life or not?
Right.
So there you go for that one.
Right.
And Adna, like I said, means youthfulness. That's why a popular name nowadays for girls is Adina. It also means delicate. Like if you want to say someone to do something delicately, like like I say, you're carrying something heavy, and you don't break the walls, don't do this. Ba'adinut, calm down, gently. So ba'adinut is gently. So a lot of, it's an interesting root and Gan Eden, like I mentioned. So now I want to move on to other things. Our bodies are made of cells. And we'll go back to this later also. How do you say cell in Hebrew? And now cell in English has two meanings. There are cells in your body, and also if you go to prison, they'll put you in a cell. So this word cell, ta, is for both in Hebrew also. And really, it comes from the same place. The Tanakh doesn't talk about cells in our body, but it does talk about cell, not a prison cell, but just a chamber. And the pasuk that I brought here actually is talking about chambers that are in the Beit HaMikdash. In the end of Sefer Yehezkel, an interesting passage of 9 Perakim, he has a vision. It's like the longest vision in the book. A vision where an angel brings him to Jerusalem. He lived in the generation right after the temple was destroyed. And he grew up in Jerusalem, and then he was exiled, along with many other people, to Babylon. But in this vision, he sees Jerusalem, and he sees the Beit HaMikdash rebuilt, different from when he remembered it, grander and greater than he remembered it. And it's 9 chapters of him describing, getting a tour of the whole building, how it looks, basically describing a blueprint of a future temple to be built. And then towards the end also he sees the service going on again. He describes the service, and some places it's different from the service described in the Torah. So that's why in the Gemara there's a discussion of putting Sefer Yehezkel in Genizah. The rabbis wanted to take Sefer Yehezkel and say, this is not part of the Tanakh. It can't be, because there's some of the things described at the end about the Beit HaMikdash and the service and the rules are different from the Torah. Until, I don't remember who the rabbi was, but there was one rabbi, maybe someone else remembers, there was one rabbi that said, no, give me the book. He went through all the psukim and explained how really it's not a contradiction. Really, it's the same thing as the Torah meant, just you have to read it this way, read it that way. So that's the end of Sefer Yehezkel, very interesting passage. But for our purposes, and this isn't the only example, if you're an architect and you need new words in modern Hebrew, look at this description of a building. So at the very end, he sees like these rooms, chambers as part of the whole Beit HaMikdash complex, and they're called ta'im. And therefore, a ta became a cell. So it's a cell in prison or any type of chamber, also in your body, ta'im.
What's atumot?
So I bolded the word atumot. Thanks for asking that. Halonot atumot. In the cells, in those rooms that he saw, the windows were sealed. Atum means sealed. And I bolded it because it's a very useful word to know. Atum means sealed. So if you want your roof sealed because it's leaking, you get someone, la'atem et-tagag. And that's atum. Any questions?
Sounds like a tomb.
Very good. Sounds like a tomb. Next thing, sometimes when you go to the doctor, he finds that you have some sort of inflammation, and that's a daleket. I didn't include any source because we all know the hadlik is to light a candle or to turn something on. So therefore, if part of your body is inflamed, that's a daleket. It's been lit on fire. So if you have conjunctivitis, that's daleket einayim. If you have bronchitis, daleket re'ot, right, our lungs. If you have an ear infection, daleket oznaim, and so on and so forth. When you go to the doctor.
So would you say that was utilizing English to come up with that?
I don't know. You could just say that's the concept. That's what's happening. So in English, inflammation comes from the word flame. There's no flames in your eyes when you have conjunctivitis. It's just all red and hot. So the same process that was witnessed happening in other languages.
They would utilize the same.
The generation that revived the Hebrew language said we'll do the same thing. We have words. Let's use them. Let's give them new meaning. Another thing. I missed the source. I forgot to copy here for the word zihum. Zihum means infection. I included here. Sorry. There's 3. The next 3 words all come from the same source. That's why. Sorry. So we have zihum means infection. Hamsan means oxygen. If someone is short of breath, they'll give them in the hospital oxygen. And then adashot maga are contact lenses. Okay, so all these 3 random things we're going to see all come from the same source here in Masechet Tirumot. So now, just a little background. Tirumah, when a farmer in Israel harvests his field, he's got to give a portion of the produce to the Kohen. Like Mr. Blanco here, for example, Kohen. Now, the thing about Tirumah is only a Kohen is allowed to eat it. Nobody else is allowed to eat it. And therefore, one of the cases that comes up in this Masechet Tirumot is what if that Tirumah, whether it was a piece of bread, a grape, an olive, or we'll see later it'll be an onion that was Tirumah that I gave you. What if it fell into a pot of food that was just regular produce that anyone could eat? But similar question that nowadays we just have a question of what if a non-kosher meat fell into a pot of kosher meat or a drop of milk fell into a meat stew? But in Masechet Tirumot you have a similar question. What if something that's Tirumah fell into food that's not Tirumah? How can it be canceled out? Do you have to throw the whole thing away? So the Mishnah says, let's say you have an onion. Now, onion is special because onion is a very strong flavor. Exactly. Harif, they call it in the halakha language. By the way, nowadays, harif just means spicy food, which they took from halachot regarding things like batzal. Batzal is described as harif, so it gives flavor more strongly than other foods. But as you have an onion that fell into shenatano b'toch adashim. You have a bowl of lentils that you're cooking, let's say like a lentil soup, and an onion falls in. So then there's, depends. Im shalem mutar. If the onion is tirumah, the lentils are not. So if the onion is complete, then it doesn't give flavor. But if it's cut up, then it gives flavor. Then anyone knows that if you have an onion just sitting in your kitchen, it's not going to make you cry. But if you start cutting it, all of a sudden the waterworks start flowing. You start tearing up because that releases, the onion, the pungency. Bless you. So if you drop the full onion into the pot, it's not going to give the flavor. But if it was cut up, then all right, as long as you can taste it, then the whole thing is forbidden because it's tirumah. So already we touched upon one of our words because we have lentils. So in modern Hebrew, in adashim are lentils, adashot are lenses. Lenses because they're shaped like a lentil.
Right.
And that's probably where the English word lenses also probably comes from lentil. I don't know what the Latin roots are, but it's basically, that's how they invented the word for lenses. Something that's shaped like a lentil. So, and adashot maga are contact lenses. After we'll get to glasses and see why the word lenses is not in glasses. Okay, now continuing the Mishnah to get to our other words. Later on, Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, this whole rule with the onion, if an onion fell into what's sahana? Sahana is like sardines, fish that are pickled in a brine. It's a very strong flavor. So if we put onions, it was an onion of terumah that you can't eat, but it was fish that was kosher that you can eat. He says, the flavor is just to balance out the strong flavor of the fishy brine. So therefore, it doesn't make the whole thing asur. If you didn't follow me, it's okay. The point was, they told it to zuhama. It says, that fish, that sardine, it has a very strong sort of thing, like a polluted kind of taste. So zuhama, this word now means pollution. Zihum avir is like air pollution, and also if like your body is being polluted by something, that's zihum, infection. So it comes from this stinky fish. So when your body has something, stinky or foreign, that's zihum. Okay, then another case that has to do with this, the tirumah falling into food that's kosher. Tapuah shiriseko untano letoch isa. What if you have an apple that you grind it up into applesauce, and the apples you can't eat because it's tirumah? Well, of course, you're kohen, then you could eat all of this. That's fine. But if you're not a kohen, so first of all, the apple that was crushed up, so modern Hebrew, they say, that's the word for sauce now, resek. We have an apple crushed up. So that's, by the way, like resek agvaniot is tomato paste, or resek tapohaim. It comes from here. That's what everyone in Israel now knows applesauce, resek tapohaim, from this Mishnah and Masechet Tirumot, who reads. And then So the rule there is apples also can have like something strong about them. They can make things sour if you put it in a dough. Isa is a dough. V'himitza. So if it made it sour, then it's asur because it gave the flavor. But the point is, himitza. So this is related to another word that some of us might be familiar with, which is hometz.
Vinegar.
Vinegar, exactly. So what's vinegar? Wine, if you let it sit for long enough,
Oxidized.
exactly, interacts with oxygen. So there's no word for oxygen in the Tanakh, in the Mishnah, in the Gemara. The study of different elements really blossomed a lot later than that. But now you need a word for all of these elements on the periodic table, and all of them have interesting names. Some of them are in the Tanakh, like gold, iron, silver, etc. All the metals, really. But how do you say oxygen in Hebrew? So hamtzan is the thing that makes wine turn into hometz. Makes wine turn to vinegar, or makes foods sour because they oxidize too long. Similar to that, how do you say hydrogen in Hebrew? Uses the same principle. What does hydrogen mean in English? So gen means to create, like Genesis, and hydro means water, right? Like hydration. So hydrogen, the element that makes water, right? When hydrogen reacts with oxygen, H2O is water. So therefore, in Hebrew, they said, okay, the Hebrew word is meiman, the thing that makes water, and that's hydrogen. We have carbon, it's called pahman, which just means paham. We say it on Friday night, right? Bameh madlikin, sha'osa paham. If you extinguish the candle, it makes it like a charcoal, charred. So charcoal is paham, and therefore carbon is pahman. Because that's what where you find carbon. Carbon is elements, and so hydrocarbons are pahmimiyot. So when you're looking at your food, you'll see stuff like pahmimiyot. Paham, maim, hamsan du pahmit is carbon dioxide. Yeah, I think that's all right. So they didn't take anything not Hebrew. It's all Hebrew words that we know. It's from the Tanakh, from the Mishnah. You change it up a little bit, and it fits the modern purpose. I think we covered all the words here. But we said contact lenses. But we all know glasses. How do you say glasses? Mishkafayim. Most of us learn that in school. Where does that come from? So I love this pasuk. This is pasuk in Devarim. We ask God to look down from the heavens and bless us. Look down, gaze down from the heavens upon us and bless us. So, looking at something, hashkifa, look down. So, mishkafayim, where you used to see your spectacles to look at something.
The word hashkifa isn't used in modern.
Oh, hashkifa. If you wanted to say something to look at something, can tistakel. But this root.
It's more of a
it comes up a lot. It's more of a biblical term, but this root shin kof pei, it comes up in mishkafayim, most well known to us. But when you go to the airport, you go through security. That machine, the X-ray machine, whatever, mechonat shikuf. It's the machine that makes things transparent. The shakuf means transparent. You can see right through it. Kashkifa, you look right through it. Or when if you have a slideshow. So each slide in the slideshow is called a shekef, like a slide that you look at.
Right.
So that's a very important root. Comes up in tons of modern words. They went crazy with this one. So that's mishkafayim. All right, we didn't talk about hospitals that much, and end of life type of things, which we'll get to now. So being admitted to a hospital is called ishpuz. Does anyone remind anyone of anything? Ushpizin, exactly. What are ushpizin? Guests. So guests, there's already a word for. Or haim, right? If you had a guest in your house in Israel, you'd say my oreach. Or to host someone is le'areach, mishu. It's a verb also. But admitted to a hospital, they use a little bit of a different word, ishpuz, which also means a guest, but it's a different type of guest. So there's tons of ways to conjugate the verb also. Ushpazti. Kenhu ushpaz bebet holim, Hashem yishmor. So that's ushpaz. Ushpaz is to be in the hospital. And my own little take on this is that we use that word for the sukkah. How long are we in the sukkah for?
Hopefully not that
A
long.
week. Hopefully not that long. A week, that's it. So I think it's, it's like wishful thinking. Okay, we're just an ushpizin in the hospital. We're not permanent. Resuscitation, hahya. This is related to a word that we say in the Amidah. Mahayeh hametim. To call someone to come to life. So nowadays, if you do CPR, you're also mahayeh. So, or if you're doing CPR, hahya. Really, CPR is cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So the full term would be hahya'at lev re'ot. Lev is heart and re'ot are lungs. But for short, hahya. If before you do CPR on someone, you check if they have a pulse, their heart is beating. So what's a pulse? Dofek. We already talked about Friday night. So shira shirim. Ani shanav libi'ir. I'm sleeping, my heart is awake. Kol dodi dofek. Right? She hears her beloved knocking on the door. How do you knock? With a steady beat. So your heart pumping, that pulse, is dofek. So to knock on something is litfok, and also dofek is pulse. Nowadays in Hebrew, it's also like there's a lot of slang surrounding this word. Like if someone is like messed up, like tadafuk, like you've just been like knocked in the head too many times, type of thing. And it comes up. Every Hebrew TV show would have it because people use it all the time. Or like, I totally got screwed with this. I need nitfakti. Like I got. So I both did say Laila. Say Laila like drops of dew at the night, but nowadays the sisim are like shards of shrapnel. So you hear that sometimes, like they got sisim in his body from the explosion, from the rockets. Okay, this is a fun one. Not fun to experience, but the word is fun. Saharharet is vertigo. When the room is spinning. So we have this source that actually comes from Aramaic, and we spoke about last time how the modern Hebrew, those that revive language look to Aramaic to invent a lot of new words because you have something similar in Hebrew and Aramaic. So sahar means to go around. We have, for example, this statement in the Gemara. The Torah tells us don't even come close to Gilui Arayot, to adultery. So Ula, one of the rabbis of the Gemara, had an analogy to this. He said, why does Torah tell us don't even come close? It's like if you have a Nazir. A Nazir is someone who took a vow, right, not to drink wine. Afilu shum kirva asur. So even coming close is forbidden. Mishum, just like we would say, lech lech amrei nazira. Go, you tell the Nazir. Sahor, go around. Lecharma la tikrab. Don't go into the vineyard. If there's a vineyard in his way, don't take a shortcut through the vineyard. It's forbidden for you to eat the grapes, so just go around. Don't even come close. So the Torah tells don't come close to adultery. So just like you tell Nazir, don't even go into the vineyard. There's nothing wrong for him to just walk next to the vineyard, but no, you tell him to go around. So sahar means go all the way around, just like vertigo. Sahar is this sensation that everything's spinning around it. Yeah.
That's the word that they used when Yehoshua when they went around this.
There it would say lisovev. And
so it's a different word.
Exactly. There are actually places in the Torah where it says saviv. When the Kohanim sprinkle the blood on the Mizbeach, it says, they sprinkle the blood saviv all around the Mizbeach. And there, the translation of Onkelos, the Aramaic translation of the Torah says sahor. They sprinkle the blood around. So saviv means around, and you have sivivon. But for this medical term, to make it sound a little more sophisticated, use Aramaic. Why not? So that's saharharet. And also sounds like something like the word reminds us of Shira Shirim. There's this pasuk, Al tiruni shani shaharharet. Don't look at me because I'm all black from the sun, all sunburned. So it's a similar, word structure to that. But it doesn't really have anything to do with it. Another interesting one, seizures. You're having a seizure. In Hebrew, it's a pirkus. Seizure of pirkusim. And that comes from Masech Halim talks about slaughtering animals. All right, so when you slaughter an animal, sometimes the body continues to twitch and spasm, even after the shahita has been done. And this passage here is actually talking about an interesting question. If an animal's slaughtered, the second it's slaughtered, it's kosher. You're allowed to eat it, even if and most of us would never want to do this, but even if the body is still twitching, you can grab a piece and eat it. It's kosher officially. But there's another rule called ever min ahai, right? A limb from a dead animal, from a living animal. Sorry, you can't rip off a limb and eat it. That's barbaric. I don't know if it's a thing to do it. The Torah says it's asur, and not only is it asur, it's one of the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach. Even for non-Jews, even for Gentiles, that's not allowed. So if a Gentile asks the Torah, say I'm allowed to do this, no, you can't. Forbidden. The Torah doesn't care how you slaughter, how you kill the animal. That's just for us Jews. But for Gentiles, even that's forbidden. And there's a question here. So what if the animal's slaughtered, and then it's still pirkusim, it's still twitching? Can you rip off a piece? For Jews, it's definitely kosher because it doesn't matter what after you slaughter it, it's done. But for non-Jews, maybe it would still be considered alive. So that's the whole question here. But we have the word mefarkeset. They said, oh, that's what someone have a seizure. It's the same kind of thing. It's twitching, spasming. So that's anyone in Israel would use that. How many know where it comes from? I don't know, but there you have it. We're going to see this Masechet Hulin that talks about animals and kashrut. It goes through all the different parts of the animal's bodies, and there are a lot of words there that are used in modern Hebrew because all these, different parts of the body that weren't discussed in the ancient sources. Then we realize, oh, they are. Just to look at the animals that are discussed, kosher, not kosher. Another one there is moach. Moach, many of us know, is brain. But that actually is an ancient usage also. We have this Gemara where someone makes a statement and then someone else says, if he made such a statement, it seems like he doesn't have a brain in his head. But interesting, the reason I included it here is because you see how it's a word that developed even in ancient times. Because in Tanakh it meant one thing, and then later on in the Gemara it means another thing. In the Tanakh it doesn't mean a brain, moach, it means bone marrow. And there's this pasuk here in Iyov about moach and the atzamot, and because it's like spongy, the bone marrow, it's similar consistency to the brain, so later on it meant brain, because of the texture.
And it's also interesting that all of the Chumash and Gemara, you never hear the word brain,
right?
Because they didn't understand that that's what you think. They used to think it would come from your heart.
Often, like the thoughts are attached to the lev.
You should love the whole of Avacha.
Right.
They would think that's where your thoughts would come from.
Interesting. I bolded the word shalev here also. This is Sefer Iyov. This is one of the chapters where he has like a very negative view of the world. He thought he was so righteous and he's suffering. And he says, I see all the time the bad people, all the bad guys, kulo shalaran v'shalev. Like they die after they've lived a long, tranquil life. How come I didn't get that? All the bad people get it. So shalev means tranquil. And this is used until today, shalva, when you tell someone, I just want to, be at peace of mind, that's shalva. That comes from here. We continue talking about the body. We have the heart, lev, right? How does it send blood throughout the body? There are arteries that send the blood away and veins that bring the blood back to the heart. So the arteries are called orakim. And there's another pasuk from Iyov. We have orkai lo yishkabun. Laila atzamai nikar me'alai v'orkai lo yishkabun. He's describing how he's suffering so much he can't even sleep. So he says, my bones don't sleep at night and my arteries don't lie down to sleep. So how do we know that orakim means arteries from the pasuk? It could be any other part of the body. It just says v'orkai lo yishkabun. My orakim don't sleep. How do we know it means arteries? So I brought this pasuk here. Again, we're talking about targum, right? If you open up the Chumash, most Chumashim have the translation of Unkelus. It's still widely studied, even though we don't speak Aramaic anymore. It's not necessarily helping us, but he adds a lot of interesting insight in his translation. And here I'm bringing a pasuk with the Aramaic translation to show you that orakim means arteries. What's this pasuk? There's a war. The 4 kings versus the 5 kings. Remember this war? With Abraham, he saves Lot. So when it's describing the war, it says, "V'amek hasidim be'erot hemar, v'yanusu melech Sodom v'Amorah, v'yipilu shama v'nisharim heranasu." Oh, they ran away, and the rest ran to the mountains. So they ran away to the mountains. How does the Aramaic translation? U'deishtaru letura araku, which means those who were left over ran to the mountains. Tura is a mountain, and araku means they ran away. So if it means ran away, that's how I know that orakim means arteries, because it's what runs away. That's where the blood runs away from the heart. And nowadays, you have, for example, hasam orakim is a tourniquet, something that blocks arteries. Last week we talked about mahsom, meaning to block. So once you have words, there's a lot of interesting things you can say, all these new terms, and we have the words for them. And the arteries we talked about, but the other side of the equation is the veins that bring the blood back to the heart. And there we go back to Hulin, that Masechet that talks about the kashrut and slaughtering and animals. We also have there, so this is really a word that, it's not a new word, but it's brought into popular usage now because it was always part of Hebrew. And there they talk about, how much of the animal's neck do you have to cut for the shahita to be done. And Yehuda says you need to do the windpipe, the trachea, and also the viridim, the jugular veins. It says the shahita is not kosher until you cut the jugular veins. That's what Yehuda says. The other rabbis disagree, and that's not what's done. But you see viridim. Also, you might notice that varod. What color is varod?
Red, like a rose.
Yeah, like a rose. Yeah, maybe it used to be red. Nowadays it's used for pink because Adom is red. Like Dam is blood, Adom is red. Varod is nowadays pink, but perhaps it used to also be red. Shoshana. But vered is also a type of flower. Exactly. This is a fun one, tabur. And we're running low on time, so I'm not going to read through everything. But tabur is a navel or belly button. And it appears in the Tanakh, but it doesn't. There's a few steps until it came to mean belly button. So in the Tanakh, and actually, there's this pasuk talks about people that are living or standing in camp in tabur haaretz. Like the story here is about a war in Sefer Shoftim, and one guy says to another, he says, look, I see them running away, running down from Tabur Haaretz. So Tabur Haaretz means the navel of the land, like the center of the land, but also like the highest part. So later on we're going to see how Tabur means navel, because it talks about when a baby's born, you tie the umbilical cord. But in Tanakh, Tabur Haaretz means like, I guess it's imagining someone who has like a belly that comes out a little bit, and the highest part is the belly button. It's like the top. So I thought that's interesting to include that story about someone coming down from the navel of the land. And also it's like a little bit depressed, so maybe it looks like a fortification on top of a hill. Another interesting from the same story about Abimelech, a lot of wars in Sefer Shoftim, we have some people running away and they go into a tower. In the second pasuk there, it says, they ran up to a tower, but then the enemies burned down the tower. So tower is usually Migdal. But here you have an interesting word, tzariyah. So what's tzariyah? So it comes from the word tzroah, which means to scream or to yell, which is a very rare word, but a few places in Tanakh where it's used. And if tzroah is to scream, to yell, then tzariyah is the place where you yell from. So you go up to like a high tower if you want everyone in the town to hear you. Like, hear ye, kind of thing. So that's sariyah. And why am I bringing up this word? It's a tower nowadays in Israel would be called the Migdal. Or there's also like skyscrapers are Gordei Shahakim, which means skyscrapers. But if you're playing chess, there's one piece on the corner that I included a picture of. What's that piece called in English?
Castle.
A castle or a rook. What's it called in Hebrew? Sariyah. From this obscure pasuk in the tower they yell from. So we need names for all the chess pieces. So that's Sariyah. People play chess, they say this, they have no idea where it comes from. Hopefully some do. And vayatzitu, I also bolded that word. They lit it on fire, because nowadays if you need a lighter, matzit. It's to ignite a fire. Although nowadays usually people just say like yishcha esh, like you have fire, and I just say no. Later on in the story, I bold the word Gulgolet. This Avimelech, he ends up getting his skull crushed. He was not the best leader in the book of Shaftim. An interesting story. It was actually a woman that dropped a stone on him from the tower. Gulgolet is still today means skull. We have it in the Torah also, the word Gulgolet, and it comes from Galgal. It's like a wheel, and the Gulgolet is round. It rolls. Galim are waves rolling, so it's all related. Galgal until today is wheels, and Gulgolet is skull. But after he gets his skull crushed in, he still has a little bit of life left, and he tells the person next to him, "Finish me off, so they won't say that a woman killed me." If anyone remembers that story. There's another interesting word here before we go on. So he tells someone next to him to stab him and kill him. So his helper stabbed him. Litkor is to stab, even until today. If you see that at the very bottom of the source. But also you have dokranim, are like spikes. For example, like if you have someone that has diabetes, they sometimes do this little blood test. They use a little pin to prick themselves, and then put the blood in the machine. So that little device is called a dokran. A device that a diabetic would use. Getting back to the medical terminology. And then the final source for this belly button is how we know it's a belly button, because what does it say on Shabbat? You can't, if your animal is giving birth, you could just help it. You can't, really do the delivery on Shabbat, not allowed, because the animal doesn't really need you. But if it's a person, for a woman, you do everything that you need to, right? You could call to, a midwife to come from any place, to a doctor. Of course, even tying the tabur, the umbilical cord, is allowed on Shabbat. So until today, that's a belly button. And I bolded the word misa'adin. That means, like I said, with animals, you could just help. You can't do really do the delivery. And until today, that word si'ud means a helper. It'd be if someone needs a caretaker. In Israel, typically Filipinos, and for an old person that needs someone, they're an aide. They call it a tipul COD, assistive person. COD, or there's bituah COD is insurance in case you get injured at work and you need a constant live-in caretaker. So that's COD. Because normally it sounds like seudah, a meal, but here we see that word has different meaning, and that different meaning is also used in modern Hebrew. COD is like a caretaker. But in general, treatment, and this is taking us to the last page, is called tipul. Tipul is treatment. If you go to the hospital, you need any type of treatment, they call it tipul. Like we talked earlier about infertility, there's tipulei IVF treatments. Later we'll get into cancer, and that has its own treatments. That's tipul. Tipul is treatment, any treatment that you receive in a hospital. And where does that come from? So in the Tanakh, we have this word tipul, or this root, tafelu alai sheker zedim. Ani b'cholev etzot pikudecha. David HaMelech says, all the zedim, all the bad guys, they stuck sheker. Tafelu alai sheker. They stuck. So here, tafelu means to stick something on someone, or slap something on them. They slapped falsehood on me. They said slander about me. David HaMelech is saying they all said slander that I want to kill the king. That it wasn't true. So when to slap something on someone, a false accusation is tafelu. How did that come to mean treatment? So there's a little bit of evolution here of the word. Later on in the Mishnah, we have if you have, let's say, you're eating two types of food together, you have to know what's the main thing and what's the tefillah, the secondary thing. So therefore, the case in the Mishnah is if you're eating something very salty and you eat it on a cracker or a piece of bread just because it's too salty, you need something to balance out that strong salty taste, the Mishnah says, don't say hamotzi. Don't say hamotzi on the bread. The bread is just tefillah, secondary. So this, in the Tanakh, the tefillah is like you slap something on, something additional. So tefillah is like something that's just secondary on the way. Like, by the way, there's a ikar in tefillah. When you're saying barachot, you say baracha on the ikar, not on the thing that's secondary. And then later on, you see in the Gemara, this is, the latest source here, it means something new. Here talking about inheritance, and we have the word tifalim. So we have some people here that know Arabic. They might be able to enlighten us here. But what does tifalim here means? It means dependents or children. Am I correct that there's some Arabic here? Tfal.
Children.
Exactly. So in Aramaic, tifalim are children. And why are they children? Because they're tafel. There's the main person and the dependents. So if you're looking looking at the real estate or estate in general, the person's children are their dependents if you're filing taxes. So that's how tifalim came to mean people who are dependent. And then finally, if someone's dependent, then it sounds like they need care. You need to treat them, to take care of them. And that's the last source here, which is an interesting story in the Gemara here. We had recently Tisha B'Av, and one of the things that happened to Tisha B'Av is Hayta Menaglim. Right? They went to the land and they gave back a bad report. And one of the things they said in their bad report is Eretz Ochelet Yoshebe'ahi. You can see in the last source. It's a land that eats its inhabitants. And why did they say that? So the Gemara says, you know why? Because when they were traveling through the land, every city that they went to, they saw a funeral. But why was there a funeral? So God said to them, the funeral, I made people die while you were visiting, so they'd be distracted. They'd be too busy taking care of the dead to look at you and to pay attention to you. It wasn't because the land caused people to die. I gave you a blessing so you could fulfill your mission easily, and you turned it into, you looked at it the wrong way, and you used it as a way to speak slander about the land. So how does treating the dead, handling the dead? In the last line, Ad avon mitaplin be, avon miyalelin karta. While they were in the middle of taking care of the dead, you could have been doing your job instead of, saying, "Oh, this is bad that they're all dying." So taking care of the dead here is mitaplin. And so nowadays they said we need a word for treatment, care. So that's the word tipul. It was taking care of a body in the ancient sources, but now it's taking care of sick people. Next one is sartan. Sartan is, anyone in Israel can tell you, cancer, but it also is the name of an animal. Can anyone guess what animal the sartan is? I have here a list of the mazalot. Crab, exactly. One of the zodiac signs is called sartan, which in English we would call it cancer. Anyone here? Actually, it's now. Now is the sign of cancer. Exactly. The zodiac sign is cancer. The constellation looks like a crab. And cancer, I guess, in Latin means crab. But just like, in English, cancer is the zodiac sign for the crab, but also means the disease. So in Hebrew also, there's sartanim, or crabs, and sartan it's cancer. The next source is this interesting story about how, or interesting statement about how all the different zodiac signs represent stages in a person's life. So you can read that on your own time. But the last source for cancer that I included, I was just looking for sources that talk about cancer. Most of these sources are actually very late. Like the word sartan for crabs doesn't appear in the Torah. It's not very late sources, but now it's used in modern Hebrew. But interestingly, the Seforno, who lived in the 15th century, in his commentary on the Torah, when he's talking about sara'at, he's trying to explain what sara'at really was, and he describes it as a sartan, the cholaguf b'chlal. This sara'at is like a sartan in the body. So I don't know, if there's earlier sources. I don't know if cancer was a known thing then, but he's describing a certain type of disease that spreads as a crab. So interesting that
It's,
he used the word sartan. What?
it's very weird.
Yeah, it's very weird. So something to wonder, the Sephora had this interesting insight that in light of modern Hebrew, you say, oh, he's talking about something that's like a cancer, but that word for cancer wasn't invented yet.
Yeah.
It just meant a crab. So very interesting foresight. There might be more to this story that I don't know in the development of the word for cancer and crabs, but I had to include that, to share that. And we talked about treatment. So one treatment that might be used for cancer is a radiation type of treatments. It's like aggressive kind of thing, but radiation is krina. And where does that come from? Rays, exactly. So keren usually means something else. What is a keren? Horn, like an animal would have. But when Moshe comes down from Har Sinai, we have this interesting passage. They see that his skin is glowing, radiating with light. Some Gentiles are still under the impression that Jews have horns because of this, but it doesn't mean horns, it means rays of light, which are similar to horns, I guess, in a certain way. They're like something that travels in a certain direction. I don't know, but that's radiation now, krina. So if you say stay away from the microwave, the radiation, you say, krina titrahek ma mikrogal, which is microwave, because gal is wave. So what did Moshe do when he had this radiation coming from his face? The instruction was, when you're teaching the people, leave your face uncovered so they could see the glow, the radiation, the Torah, the Kedusha. But at all other times, you need to cover your face with a scarf. So after he finished teaching the people, he put the masveh back on his face. So what's masveh? Some type of face covering, some type of scarf. But nowadays, there's a interesting new word, hasfa'ah, means camouflage. Comes from here. He, covered his face. So camouflage is something that an animal uses to cover themselves up in nature to hide from predators. And it comes straight from here. Hasfa'ah is camouflage, from the masveh of Moshe. And since we're talking about covering our face, how could we not talk about corona? So wearing a face mask nowadays in Israel, and of course I didn't know this word until very recently, because who talked about face masks until a year and a half ago. But if you're in a store and they say, put your face mask on, they say, ta'ateh ta masecha. La'atot masecha bevakasha. What is la'atot? Right? You don't, when you wear a face mask, not lilvosh, masecha, lahbosh, masecha, not anything else, la'atot. Where does that word come from? The special verb for putting on a face mask is a special verb that's not used for anything else. And it comes from, again, we talk about sara'at, the leper. What does the Torah say? The person who has sara'at, so there's a certain protocol they do is go at the edge of the camp, right, in quarantine. Begadav yupurumim, and his clothes should be all disheveled. Veroshoya parua, his hair should be uncut and unkempt and unruly. Parua means wild. Even until today, Hama'arava parua is the Wild West. Va'al safam yateh, and he should cover himself up to his safam, is his mustache. Cover his face. So that's exactly where you would put a face mask. So nowadays, la'atot masecha is the same verb. Brought back to life from tzara'at. Any questions? V'tamet tamei yikran. Wherever he goes, say, I'm impure, keep away from me. And it's a similar thing, he's keeping social distancing. So, in order to get out of everyone having to wear face masks, what's the solution that we all pursued? So varying degrees of success at this point. The hisun. Nowadays in Israel, everyone's talking about the hisun. Hisunim. What is a hisun? A vaccine. We'll talk about a little bit of Arabic here also. But there's this pasuk in Yeshayahu where it says, "V'haya emunat eitecha hosen yishuot chochma v'dat yirat Adonai hi otzaro." So hosen yishuot is the strength of our salvation. So from here, the strength, hisun, is something that gives you strength against the virus. And from what I'm aware, there's a popular Arabic name Hassan, which means strong. Any Arabic speakers here confirm Hassan? What's Hassan?
The word beauty, like Hussein.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's related to Hassan, but I've heard that Hassan is strong. Maybe it's related, or maybe not. I don't know.
Pop, what is Hassan in Arabic? Hassan.
Huh?
Hassan in Arabic, what does that mean?
The name
Hassan.
Hassan. Yeah.
Hassan.
I don't know.
So nowadays in Israel, Hisun is vaccine, and the way you get the vaccine is with an injection. And the Torah, there are no injections, but we have something similar. This pasuk here in Bamidbar talks about the gifts of the Nisi'im. So we read 12 different Nisi'im. The head of each tribe all brought gifts when the Mishkan was completed. And one of the things in their gifts was a mizrak. Mizrak ahad kesef. What's a mizrak? It's a type of vessel used to catch blood. And this appears elsewhere in the Torah. Catching, the Kohanim, they would catch the blood of the animals in this certain vessel. And then it's called mizrak because what do they do after? Lizrok. They throw and sprinkle the blood. So you change the verb a little bit, and that's what they did in modern Hebrew, to be an injection, like to throw something into your bloodstream, so to speak. But there's also this one pasuk that sounds like it already has kind of that flavor. And this is the book of Hosea, where one of the prophets that is giving rebuke and to the tribe of Ephraim specifically. Ephraim ba'amim hu yitbolal, Ephraim haya'uga b'li afucha, achlu zarim koho. Saying this is what's going to happen to Ephraim because he's not listening to God. Achlu zarim koho, all the strangers, other nations will eat him up alive, eat up his strength. V'hu lo yada, gam seva zar kabo, v'hu lo yada. He'll also become old without even knowing it. So seva is age, like pnei seva takum, in front of an old person, she'll stand up in front of the elderly. So zar kabo is like he'll be injected with old age. And that's the end of my sources for the current lecture. I promised that I would say a few words about the revival of the Hebrew language, just a few thoughts based on what I read. We're a little bit past the time. But and one of the things we talked about last week is how a generation of these Hebrew enthusiasts managed to revive the Hebrew language. And we talked about how it started with this renewed interest in Hebrew literature and scholarly people who were distancing themselves from religion because they felt it wasn't for them, but they still wanted to participate in Jewish culture in a certain way. And one of the main outlets for that in Eastern Europe, there was this great activity among the Haskalah movement of writing literature in Hebrew, and then it started with translating plays into Hebrew. It became sort of like a scholarly activity. But at the same time in Israel, we're talking about the mid-1800s, there were new immigrants coming, and Hebrew started to be spoken just as a way for people from different countries. Some spoke Arabic, some spoke Russian, some spoke French, to communicate with each other. They each were familiar with Hebrew from the prayers, from the Torah. And things really started getting off the ground around the time of the first Aliyah. So we're talking about the 1880s, when you started having people from Europe who were studying the Hebrew language and inventing new words so that they can write things in Hebrew, and they were coming to Israel. They started to make Aliyah, and they saw that people were already speaking to each other in Hebrew. They said, all right, we need to do this in an organized fashion and create new words. And I think the watershed moment was when you had a generation of kids that grew up that Hebrew was their first language. And that was like the proof that this can be done. And the way that was done was by establishing elementary schools where they only taught Hebrew. And that's how people living in Israel, the late 1800s, early 1900s, you had first a generation that, they created elementary schools where they only taught the kids Hebrew. And, if you're in school, the kids, they don't know that there's another word for the concepts that they're learning. You could just invent words and feed it to the kids, and there you go. And there was a Hebrew language committee that worked on creating new words and teaching to the kids. At first it was only lower education, but then as that generation grew older, it became, there was high schools, and then eventually the first university that was able to teach only in Hebrew. And then that generation, grew up, they married people, there's a generation that at home they spoke a different language, whatever language their parents spoke. Hebrew was their second language, but they learned it in school. But now you have people from different backgrounds. My first language is Russian, your first language is Arabic, is French, is English. They taught their kids Hebrew, and you had the first generation that Hebrew was their native language. and it became, a fact. Hebrew is alive. It's being used. The first person, famously, in the modern era, who raised a child that Hebrew was their native tongue was Eliezer ben Yehuda, and that's why his name is known to many of us. He made that symbolic jump, that leap of faith. My son Itamar is only speaking Hebrew. Eliezer ben Yehuda, he spoke Russian, he spoke Polish, he knew a lot of languages. Languages was his thing. He wrote a whole, dictionary on Hebrew because he loved languages and he wanted to bring back the Hebrew language. But he taught his child only Hebrew. That was his, native tongue. And he tried to convince other families to do the same, but really only once there were schools established that taught Hebrew, and where you had teachers that studied the language and knew, okay, they all agreed these are the words that we've invented. That's how it took off. Tel Aviv was the first Hebrew-speaking city. Tel Aviv was established in 1909. Then there was no state of Israel. There was no central authority. Each city or Jewish settlement administered themselves, and so Tel Aviv, they were the first that said all the street signs are going to be in Hebrew. Every cafe the menus are going to be in Hebrew. Everything is in Hebrew in this city, and people who didn't speak Hebrew were admonished in the streets. You had Hebrew police that said, Ibrit, daber Ibrit. It's something I read online. People go around and encouraging it. But enough people thought that it was a worthwhile idea and a worthwhile venture that it took off, and now we have even non-Jews speaking Hebrew. Arabs in Israel have to learn the language. It's a fact. That's what's spoken in Hebrew in Israel. Any questions? Thanks so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed. And next week, I ask everyone, I'm going to run a piece of paper if you could write your name and phone number just so I can keep in touch with you in case we decide, this night doesn't work and we want to change it back to Monday night or Wednesday night, that we can, I can update everyone. Next week's topic might be going to a sports game or going to your local bar, all the words that you need, or just hanging around your house, furniture, the kitchen. I haven't decided yet, but it will be announced at the beginning of next class.
So at the end of the series, the goal is we'll be able to go to